Kevin, I wanted to thank you very much. Kevin is hosting me. We have load shedding in South Africa, and Kevin has equipped me with a heater, with warmth, with electricity. He's a wonderful host. And I went to, last time I ate at Kevin, and tonight I'm eating at Kevin, and I'm spending time with Kevin and his dad, and it's a wonderful, to me, I love these things. I'm not going to see Kevin for a while, so thank you, Kev. Thank you.
Alia, what are you talking about?
I've got to go in 40 minutes, guys?
Okay, all right, fine. Go ahead, teach us, Kev. No problem.
Do you want to just do this? Okay, this is quick. This will be quick. This Malocha.
So then we'll just step right in.
This Malocha, what we're learning today is for Rosh Hashanah Simcha about Yeta, Chaim, Ben Braina, and other Cholim of Klal Israel. Grinding. The prohibition, there's 6 prohibitions relating to grinding. Breaking up something into very small particles, milling grain to make flour, grinding coffee, using a pepper mill, using a grater, mincer, or chopper, and removing dried mud, causing powder to be formed. One may not cut vegetables into small pieces, but one may cut them into slightly larger pieces than normal, if such food is for immediate consumption. If a young child has difficulty digesting slightly larger pieces, one may cut and serve small pieces if it is immediately prior to eating. Food which does not grow from the ground, such as cooked meat, fish, or eggs, may be mashed or cut into small pieces, but a grater or mincer may not be used. One should avoid mashing a banana, avocado, potato, or similar food with the teeth of a fork, or spreading them with a knife on a slice of bread. However, they may be mashed with a spoon or the handle of a fork. It is permitted to crumble bread, cake, or matzah, since these are made from ground flour, and there is no grinding after grinding. One may use non-electric dicers for cutting bread, meat, eggs, or cheese.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Thank you very much. All right, let's not do revision for yesterday. Whatever you forgot, watch the shir. Let's just get straight to the point. We only got 40 minutes. So basically, we're discussing an Amorite dispute. Now, it's going to get a little complicated, and I'm going to make it as simple as possible. So we're talking about an ox that gores another ox or another animal on the 15th day of this month, okay? So, then it gores on the 16th day of the next month, and yet it gores on the 17th day of the 3rd month. So you've got basically a succession of 3 months, and there's no dispute with regards to the fact that if it, for example, gored on the 15th of every month, then on that 15th of every month, if it gored a 4th time, it would be muad, and then the rest of that month, the question is, would it be tam or would it be muad? So I don't know, I mean, it's obviously, this is the one part that I'm not quite sure that makes sense to me. If an animal goes 3 times, it's muad. Does that make sense? So what do you mean if it goes on the same day every day of the month? Then it would be muad and what, tam for the rest of the days? I don't know. Once it's established a pattern of muad, is it not muad unless it desists from goring for 3 times when given that opportunity, or 3 consecutive days? I'm not 100% sure. That's the only thing I actually wanted to speak to Rabbi Cohen about. But be that as it may, let's assume the premise is that it's tam, except for this, we're going along the theme of Shabbat. So the theme of Shabbat is, for some reason, if it gets irked only on Shabbat and goes on Shabbat, it becomes muad for Shabbat, but not muad for weekdays. So I'm assuming it's carrying on with the same theme. I'm just telling you a pragmatic issue I would have with it. That doesn't make sense. But anyway, so let's just say on the 15th of every month it gores, it gets a bee in its bonnet, and that's what happens. Then it's muad for the 15th day, every day of the month, if it's had a pattern of goring on the 15th of the month. The Gemara is asking something different now. It's saying, what happens if it gores, and every month that it gores 1 day later? what is the muad status regarding an ox in that particular case? Okay, so what happens is this is a discussion between well, it's actually a dispute between Rav and Shmuel, because it was stated that if a woman experienced, now it's going to go for some reason to a particular part of the Gemara. If you look in Gemara in Nida 64a, they have a similar discussion in terms of habitual nature. Now, it's not the first time we've discussed when an animal becomes muad and when it desists from goring, how it becomes back to tam status. Okay? It was in the 24th daf, by the way, guys. I looked at it yesterday. And it stated this issue with the zav and the woman's menstrual cycle, or the woman's level of tumah and a guy's level of zav, and how it works differently with both and what the conclusion is. So it's not the first time it's looked at patterning of oxen goring with patterning regarding either menstrual cycles or states of uncleanliness. Okay? Why? Because it wants to establish a habitual pattern. So this argument is found in Nida 64a, and it's going to use this as its basis of its argument. So it was stated that if a woman experienced a menstrual discharge on the 15th day of this month, and then she experienced another such discharge on the 16th day of the next month, and yet another on the 17th day of the third month, Rav said she has established for herself a fixed monthly niddah period in which onset advances 1 day each month. Okay? Shmuel said she cannot establish this period, no pun intended, until she experiences 3 occurrences of jumping ahead 1 day. Okay, so what's the primary argument here is that it appears that Shmuel is saying that, look, you can't count the first day as a pattern because it has to be, the pattern only starts if it does it 3 times. The first time is the natural cycle. If she's been menstruating every month on the 15th like clockwork, or alternatively you measure your cycles on every 28 days, in that case, that's consistent. So the minute that pattern changes, where it's the 16th and the 17th, Rav sees it as a pattern and saying, right, we've noticed the 15th. Then we noticed the 16th. Then we noticed the 17th. It's the menstrual cycle is following a 1 day later period over a 3-month cycle. And Shmuel said, no, the first 15th day of the month is part of the previous cycle of what we've noticed to be a habit. So it would have to be like the 15th, the 16th, the 17th, and the 18th. Does that make sense? Because the 15th, 15th, 15th establishes that sort of pattern for the 15th. And then if she suddenly goes the 16th and then the 17th, he says, well, kind of like the argument that we had before. What happens if you have an ox, a donkey, and a camel? How's the muad grouped? With the 3 oxen, or the where it's muad only for oxen, or if it's muad for oxen, camel, and what do you call whatever that other animal is?
Donkey, mule.
Donkey, mule, or whatever. So how do you group then? The same thing with Shabbos and during the week. What comes first? If it's weekday, Shabbos, and then Shabbos and Shabbos, do you combine the Shabboses together, or the weekdays and say it's muad for Shabbos and weekdays, or just on Shabbos? So what he's saying here, Shmuel, is I need 3 patterns, not including the first one that might be part of another pattern. Okay, I'm going to read you the notes. I'm just summarizing it in a very, very straightforward sort of way. So just as Rav and Shmuel disagree regarding the establishment of a niddah period, so too they disagree regarding the muad status of an ox. According to Rav, an ox that gores on the 15th of 1 month, on the 16th of the following month, and on the 17th of the 3rd month is a muad. According to Shmuel, the pattern must repeat 1 more time. Okay. So I'm just going to explain it in more length. I've just given you a quick summary. I'm giving you more of a length according to explanations now of Rashi and Tosfot. If it's repeating what I've said, it's just because I'm summarizing them. but it's in no way my opinion. I'm just quoting the greats. Okay, so a woman, so it says that a woman establishes a fixed neder period by beginning her discharge on the same time for 3 consecutive menstrual periods. So it has to be noticed 1 month apart because obviously that's when the menstrual cycles are monthly. So I'm assuming that that's why it's using this analogy specifically with the um, ox, although it's different with the ox because an ox can establish a pattern more frequently than a woman's menstrual cycle. But it says in the Gemara in Nida, in 64a, that there are 2 ways to measure a woman's menstrual period. The one way is to measure a fixed period by the day of the month. Okay, like the 15th day every month, if that's when the menstrual cycle starts, that's a pattern. And it works on lunar months, by the way, guys, not on solar. So there's a second way to measure it, and that's the interval between the start of each period. So if there are 3 consecutive periods, the woman's period begins 28 days after the onset of the previous period. We presume the next period must also begin after a 28-day interval. I'm not saying it has to be 28 days. 28 days is generally most common, but whatever that pattern is, whether it's 26, 26 and 26 days or 28, 28, 28, which that is your interval way of calculating. The other way of calculating is a specific day of the month that seems to repeat itself. Okay, so why would they not be the same? Because if we look in the Hebrew calendar, Arthur, not every Hebrew month is the same length of time. So it might not be that she's not like clockwork. It might be that the months are off. I mean, just take English months, for example. 31 days a month, 30 days a month, 31 days a month, etc. And then one effect of the presumption basically concerns the rabbinic decree that a woman is presumed tameh for 24 hours prior to the onset of her period, because the possibility is that she didn't discover the bleeding until maybe sometime after it had begun. So this mandates that any food that she's preparing for you as your wife, that food has to be in a state of purity, especially if you're having guests over. It has to be in a state of tahara. So any tahoris or food that's pure can be contaminated if she's in a state of impurity, tameh. So what happens is that the Gemara is saying if she has her period like clockwork, you don't have to consider the previous 24 hours null and void. So, she touches the roast chicken and the rice, and then you tell the guest to go home. If she bleeds like clockwork, you can have guests every Friday night. If there's a problem and there's an inconsistency, you might want to spend the meal at home with your wife. So that's what I'm saying, is that what it's established on is level of consistency. So they're saying that the 24-hour safety period before is only on a woman whose menstrual cycle is inconsistent. If it's deemed that she can be counted as an onset of a menstrual period like clockwork, then you don't have to wait the 24 hours before. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, certain things affect the neder period. For example, if a woman is just hang on a second. I'm just having all these emails jumping up and down in the box. All right. So what I was going to suggest is as follows: is that at the end of the day, one of the things that affects menstrual cycle is weight. In other words, if somebody's severely malnourished and underweight, or they're suffering from stress, or there are other physical factors at play, that's also what causes it. It doesn't mean that she's done anything wrong at all. Okay, so according to Rashi, in Mishnah Nida 2a, that if a woman handles tahoros during the previous 24 hours, they remain free of tumah if she's consistent with the menstrual cycle. So Rav and Shmuel basically discuss a woman who previously established a period for a particular day of the month, say the 25th of the month. That's the example Rashi uses in Nida 64a. Now, however, she experiences a discharge on the 15th of the month, and the following month on the 16th, and finally on the 17th. Then we're saying, hang on, we're noticing a different pattern. She's skipping a day every month. So Rav rules that she has established a new pattern with these 3 discharges. One that begins each month on the day following the starting day of the previous month's periods. So on the 18th of the next month, the 19th of the one following, and so on. So since she's established a fixed period, any tahoros that she handles, let's say food that's pure, or food that isn't contaminated, let's put it like that. Any food that she handles in the 24-hour period preceding her discharge is tahor, it's pure. So Rav regards this as a period brought on the day of the month, specifically the day following the one where it began. So he says that this pattern has to be established 3 times, okay, including the first time. And in actual fact, this pattern of skipping a day, how many times do we actually observe it, by the way? It's twice, actually, according to Rav. Why? Because if she's experiencing a period every 15th of the month, and now she's suddenly going to the 16th, skipping a day and doing it the following day, and then the next month, the 17th, then Rav said that's okay. But it's actually 2 skipping periods, because prior to that, we've noticed that she's been consistent on the 15th day of every month. So Rav said that's sufficient for him. Shmuel said it's not, because that 15th could be grouped with the pattern of previous consistencies for the 15th, and he requires a 3rd skipping date, which would be the 18th of the following month, which means there are 4 periods of periods. Sorry, guys. Four cycles. So he was saying that you have to, Shmuel is saying that you have to observe it 3 times skipping in order to establish a new pattern. So, this is the same with the goring, is that if it gored on the 15th day of every month, and then it's decided to skip a day, and then gored on the 16th, skip a day the next month, gore on the 17th, according to Rav, we noticed 2 skipping patterns, but it's still 3 in a row of alternative months. He's saying it's fine. Shmuel says it's only 2 skipping patterns, and we need a 3rd skipping pattern, which is actually 4 gorings in successive dates in the month, and that would establish the pattern. Okay? Very straightforward. Any questions?
Good.
All right. Good. Now, what we are saying is, how does this also impact on that previous process? So I'm going to read to Gavin something when he comes back.
I am around. Carry on.
No, Gav, I'd prefer you to be back.
Sorry, I had something sitting there. I had to get it off. Sorry. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. I also leave stuff on the stove, and if you don't take it off, you don't have a place left. I completely get that. There's no issue. Okay. So there was one particular question. Do you remember, Gavin, that there was a discussion that said, well, hang on, what happens if it gores an ox and then skips an ox and gores an ox and skips an ox and gores an ox? And you've got basically the skipping and goring process. Then it's known as muad for every alternative ox that it gores. So then if it gores 2 oxen in a row, that middle one is tam, unless it establishes a consistent every goring policy. And then we say there's an ox, gores an ox, it skips a camel, it then gores a sheep, it skips an ox, it gores another ox, then, and we see the skipping, etc., but it's not discerning in terms of creatures. We're saying then it's muad for all species, alternatively. So how does this relate to this argument with Rav and Shmuel? Very straightforwardly. It relates because it's saying that according to Shmuel, there would have to be three skippings and and there'd actually have to be like four gorings in between the skippings in order to establish the pattern. So only, in other words, it gores, it skips, it gores, it skips, it gores, it skips, it gores. So only on, according to Shmuel, with the fifth goring, sorry, with the sixth or with the seventh goring established a muad pattern because it's refrained from three and it's gored four times. So on the seventh that it, when we say the seventh that it gored in between the skipping, means that there would have to be one more pattern established by Shmuel to Rav, and it's consistent throughout all these mishnahs. It doesn't change, even on the skipping process, where, as Rav would say, listen, if it skipped twice, we can see it as alternative muad. Shmuel says no, it would have to skip three times and then go four times. Does that make sense? Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go on to the next point. So the Gemara speaks about another way in which an ox is rendered a muad. Rava says, R-A-V-A, Rava says if he heard the sound of a shofar and gored, meaning if the ox heard the shofar and it gored, and again heard the sound of shofar on Rosh Hashanah, or some guy, some kid meddling with the shofar, and it gored, and the third time heard the sound of the shofar and gored, it becomes muad regarding shofros. Therefore, if it goes again upon hearing a shofar, the owner must pay full damages. So you might turn around and say, so obviously, if it gored three times in response to the shofar, on the fourth time it's muad. I don't understand the question. It's obvious. So the reason that Rava brought it up is because without Rava's teaching, you might have said that the first shofar blast was nothing more than it got a sudden fright, and in reaction to that, it reacted, and therefore it should be given a leniency on the first time, and it's not counted. And he's saying no, even if it got a fright the first time, you still count that as the first part of its muad status. The first blast also counts. Why? Because we see that there's something inherent in the blasting that's causing and irritating the animal and impelling it to gore. It's not the fright factor, it's some irritation it's getting. Therefore, on that basis, you can count the first time that the animal, the shofar blasts in order to discuss the goring. Okay? So now I'm going to share another Mishnah with you, and we're going to get started. Just give me 1 second, guys. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Gav, you want to read the Mishnah?
This Mishnah elaborates on two laws that were mentioned briefly in an earlier Mishnah 9b. The first law, if the ox of an ordinary Jew gored an ox of the temple treasury, or if an ox of the temple treasury gored the ox of an ordinary person, the owner is exempt, for it is stated in a verse that teaches one's liability for the actions of his ox. If the ox of a man strikes the ox of his fellow, the words of his fellow imply, and not an ox of the temple treasury. The temple treasury is not the fellow of an ordinary person, hence there is no compensation for damage perpetrated by or upon its ox. The second law, if the ox of a Jew gored the ox of a Canaanite, the Jew is exempt. But if the ox of a Canaanite gored the ox of a Jew, where the ox that gored was tam or muad, the Canaanite pays full damage.
Excellent. Excellent. By the way, guys, remember I answered Gavin the other day. I said there was an opinion with Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva I wasn't sure if it was Rabbi Tafel or Rabbi Akiva, but I did see something interesting on Rabbi Akiva, that if an ox gores a person, it's full payment damages. It's not half payment damages, but it's still limited, because the Kol V'chomer is that for a person it's full payment damages, but the Dayu seeks to limit it to the body of the attacking animal, not from choice property. Just so you know.
Yeah. So it's like a little bit of an in between.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So in this particular thing, have you noticed, guys, we learned this before?
Yes, we have.
And where did we learn it?
In the first book.
Yeah, in the ninth stuff. Exactly. We learned
I wasn't specific, but at least I got the right book.
Yeah.
Listen, exactly. So we learned this. So I'm just going to add a little bit of clarity, guys. A sec. I'm sure you know it. So, so the basically. Just give me one sec. All right. So the Gemara comments, now we're hitting the Gemara. Okay? The Gemara comments on the Mishnah's first clause. Our Mishnah is not in accord with the view of Rav Shimon ben Manasseh. For it has been taught in a brisa, if the ox of an ordinary person gored an ox of the temple treasury, or if the ox of the temple treasury gored the ox of an ordinary person, the owner is exempt. For it stated, if the ox of a man strikes the ox of his fellow, the words his fellow imply another person. In other words, not an ox of the temple treasury, not of an institution. Okay? But Rav Shimon ben Manasseh says, if an ox of the temple treasury gored the ox of an ordinary person, the temple treasury is indeed exempt, but the ox of an ordinary person that gored an ox of the temple treasury, whether that ox was a tam or whether it was a muad, the owner pays full damages. We see that with regard to the ox of an ordinary person, goring an ox of the temple treasury, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh stands in opposition to our Mishnah. Okay. So, just want to explain a couple of things so far as that's concerned. Is that the verse itself is in Shmot chapter 21, verse 35, okay? And let me just see if I can actually get the Safari open. Can you just hang on for me, guys, a second? Hang on, guys. I've got it. Just give me one sec. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so the Schottenstein is no good because it says, when a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox and it dies, they shall sell the live ox and divide its price. I'll share the screen anyway, but you'll see what I'm saying. When a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox. So the problem with that translation is what, guys? What happens if you live next door to the temple treasury? It doesn't say that the temple treasury shouldn't pay you, does it? If your neighbor's non-specific, if you're living next door to an institution, they should pay you if you use the word neighbor. But if you use the word fellow, in that particular case, you're talking about a human being. So I prefer the actual correct translation. Okay, just going to share this a second. Apologies. So basically, according to the Nimukei Yosef, Ordinary people and the temple treasury are not the same as each other. Ordinary people are one's fellow, but the temple treasury is an institution. That's where the source of it is. Okay? For the laws of Tam and Muad are inextricably linked, it says here. The full damage payment of a Muad is applied only to the act that would be liable to the half payment damage of Tam. So what it's actually saying in this particular verse, that if we look at the laws of Tam, let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. If, however, it's known to be the ox was in the habit of goring and its owner has failed to guard it, he must restore ox for an ox, but keep the dead animal. Okay. So what happens is that when you're talking about a Tam ox, okay, they shall sell the live ox and divide its price. Is that talking about a Tam or is that talking about a Muad, and why? I'm asking you guys a question. Guys?
What?
No, it's Tam.
What?
You're dividing the price.
Exactly. So, Kevin, I tell you why it's Tam. When I say when a man's ox injures his fellow's ox and it dies, they shall sell the live ox and divide its price. They shall also divide the dead animal. If my ox is muad, I don't give you part of my ox. I have to give you full payment, no dividing of the price, full payment, and not from the body of the live ox that attacked your ox and killed your ox. It has to come from my choice property or cash. So there we're talking about what? A Tam ox. So we're saying that the leniency of Tam only occurs when you're dealing with one's fellow. But when you're dealing with the temple treasury, the opinion is that according to this particular opinion, the Mishnah is saying, look, if the temple treasury attacks a person or a person attacks a temple treasury, in either case, you don't have to pay. Okay, but the thing of it is, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh doesn't read it like that. He was saying, look, why are you paying full payment damages? Well, it's very, very straightforward. I'm just giving it to you guys in my own words, is that the Tam leniency is only when you damage the ox of your fellow. Okay? But when you damage temple treasury, there's no leniency. That leniency is inextricably linked to the ox of the fellow, as we just read in the verse. Does that make sense? So the only thing left is muad payment from choice property. Because where it mentions Tam, it's only in relation to the ox of his fellow. Therefore, if you hit the institution, a holy institution, there's no Tam leniencies. Do you understand where he gets his evidence from or not? Gavin, Arthur, Kevin, please speak to me.
I'm fine.
Kevin, do you understand?
Okay.
Where did they get the leniency from due to half? You're talking about half payment. Is that?
Okay, so what we're saying is here, what did the Mishnah teach? Is that if the ox of an ordinary Jew gored the ox of the temple treasury, or the ox of the temple treasury gored the ox of an ordinary person, the owner is exempt. Okay, either way. Why? Because it's stated that if one's liability for the actions of his ox, it has to state in the verse, this is what the Mishnah says, that your ox must strike the man of his fellow. And if you don't strike the ox of your fellow, you don't have to pay. So the ox is the temple treasury. And it's also saying, so then why does the temple treasury not have to pay a person if it damages a person? Well, very simple, is that they're not seen as camaraderie or fellowship. Do you understand? There's an institution and a fellow. I can say Arthur's my brother, he's my fellow friend, but I can't say also Melech, I'd like Gavin to attend the shir, and I'd like also Meach as a building and the other fellows to attend my shir. because a non living human being is not a fellow. So it's saying if a non living human being damages somebody, he can't, that non living creature can't refer to somebody else in speech as a fellow. And so too, a fellow can't refer to another institution as a human being either. So, either way, according to the Mishnah, if they damage each other, neither one has to pay the other. Okay, because of this verse, um, if the ox will damage, strike the ox of his fellow. But Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh doesn't read it like that. He was saying no. On the contrary, there's no leniency of tam because tam only refers to damage of one's fellow. So, in other words, if the temple damages you, uh, the temple doesn't regard you as a fellow. It's an institution. You're not two people. So it doesn't have to pay you if it damages you. But if you damage it, the leniency of tam only applies if you damage your fellow Jew. But otherwise, we go straight to the verse of Muad. That's what it's saying. Because that leniency only applies to a fellow Jew, not an institution. Therefore, you have to pay full payment damages. We'll discuss it word for word tomorrow. I'm just giving you a summary. Kev, do you understand it or not 100%? Well, good.
Yeah, the fellow, yeah, because the institution is leniency with the institution. Fellow.
No. What I'm saying is there's a leniency if a Jew damages another Jew. Because the verse about selling the ox, selling the live ox, dividing the money to pay restitution for the dead ox, that is if you injure the ox of your fellow, that's the whole verse on tam. And therefore, according to Shimon ben Manasseh, that you don't get that tam leniency if you damage temple property. You have to pay full payment damages, muad, from choice property.
Is that one of the Hekdesh as well?
Yes, absolutely. I hardly think you have to pay full payment